Welcome to The Beat, the podcast where we talk about building equity, accountability, and trust with law enforcement. My name is Dr. Lori Hall, and today I'm joined by two very important guests. If y'all want to introduce yourselves.
My name is Jaden Stansel. I'm majoring in psychology and criminology at USF.
And my name is Tony Holloway. I'm the chief of police with the St. Petersburg Police Department.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming. So, the topic that we're talking about today is police culture, specifically, what is the blue line, right? And so, I want to start by talking about what police culture kind of involves. So, if you maybe could give us an idea of what police culture really is rooted in.
Sure. So those are the men and women. We work together each and every day, and that's the person I expect to protect my back. Because when I get that call, we're both running into danger. So I want to make sure that person, that he or she who's behind me, is going to protect me because I can't watch my back. Sometimes the bad person may be coming from my backside, or that someone's going to go through that door with me. So I have to build that trust, and I have to hopefully that you're going to go through that door when I want you to go through that door with me. And if I get involved in a fight or any type of violent situation, that I know that you're willing to get involved in that situation with me.
So, it's kind of like a brotherhood or sisterhood, right? Where you're expecting them to kind of engage with you as if you were family, as if you were the most important person, right? Is that
Yeah,
kind of
is that person that, again, that's, as you put it, yeah, they're like family, and they're going
Mhm.
to protect you, and you're going to protect them with your life. That you're going to give up your life for them, and they're willing to give up their life for you.
Okay. And there's always a lot of reference to the color blue, right? With law enforcement, that's your color, and the blue line. So, can you talk a little bit about what is meant by the blue line?
Sure, it's evolved over time. So I think it came back in the 50s, and all it was just that we are the people between good and bad,
Mhm.
law and order. That is thin because it's just a few of us, and over time it became to a point where the thin blue line is the code of silence. I
Mm,
don't know where that came from.
yeah.
It's just a cultural thing that it just started and it took on a life of its own. Because there are some also that believe that we're in this together,
Mhm.
and I'm going to have your back no matter what.
Yeah.
And again, that comes to where there were some bad officers back there in the time where they would lie for each other or would
Mhm.
not tell the truth about each other. So they would say, "Hey, do you have my back?" And you know what the thin blue line is.
Right.
But the thin blue line is about protecting people and protecting one another.
Yeah, so there's a big emphasis within police culture on loyalty, right? And so you kind of mentioned that a little bit, and the idea of, as you said, the blue line is this place where law enforcement exists, right? In that they're they're seen as the best people, right? They have this, there's a high regard for law enforcement, and they are the people that are bringing the good. They're doing good work. And at the same time, they're walking this very tight rope on exposure to the deviant underworld, right? And so
Mhm.
there's this line that they're constantly on, and it's like a tightrope they're walking on, where they're exposed to both the good of the world, and they're viewed as good, and yet they're exposed and immersed in this deviant subculture that exists within the world. And so the thin blue line, while it's evolved over time, like you mentioned, as referring to more of a code of silence, really, I think originally the thin blue line was referring to this idea that we have to have police culture rooted in loyalty, but also accountability, so that we can protect those officers, because we're so close to this deviant underworld that the temptation exists to become a part of it, so much so that we need accountability among other officers to keep them solid foundation on the blue line, to maintain their vision on that commitment to good. Would Does that resonate with you at all?
And it does, because like you're saying, you're the one when you call when someone calls 911, you're asking those officers, few of us, to protect that good and bad. And sometimes, again, we are human also.
Right.
So we see both sides. And I'll say that sexual assault person, that someone who just sexual assaulted someone, you probably want to rip his or her head off. But at the
Right.
same time, you got to make sure that you stay on one side. So that's where, like I said, that good and evil, like I want to protect this person, but at the same time, I want to hurt this person. So,
Right.
but you're there, you've been called upon to protect someone. So,
Right.
and you can see that, and that's where that line is very thin
Yeah.
because you see both sides of it.
Yeah.
And you got to remember that you're there, that thin blue line is the law.
Right. Yeah. And so, the manipulation, I think, by, the media to believe that this is really about a code of silence, right? Really is more rooted in this idea that with loyalty comes support, right? And
Correct.
that we, as officers that walk that blue line with them, right? We have the privilege of seeing what others don't. And so that's where that kind of idea of the code of silence has come in because other officers see what is going on and they're not necessarily having the same view as the outsiders have, right? And
Right.
so they keep this very insular. And the outside world views this as, this oath to silence and to not speak up, right? And almost to let evil go, right? Which is not really the experience that law enforcement are having. They're saying this is about solidarity and this is about camaraderie and this is also about having a full understanding of the events that are going on from a law enforcement lens. And so law enforcement don't necessarily view this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as this is about a code of silence, but more, the blue line refers to that solidarity and that loyalty that we have to other officers. And it's not to say that we don't hold them accountable, because I think that there's a lot of those systems in place. Would you agree with that?
I agree, and there are a lot of systems in place, a lot of things that are in place to make sure we hold officers accountable. And like you said, that thin blue line, it is a culture within itself because just like anything else, is that a lot of officers will say, "Well, you don't see the same thing that I see." So
Mm,
we tend to gravitate toward each other. You know,
right,
uh, I can see something in it that happens like today, a death of someone, or I have to stand next to a dead baby. Every officer he or she's going to experience that in life. Well, you're never going to experience that, so I can go talk to another officer about that, and he and I can
right,
share that moment together. So I have someone to talk to. So that experience, but at the same time, I know I have to react to that also. So
mm,
is there a place to when people say the thin blue line that's a culture there? Yeah, there is because uh,
mm,
we gravitate to each other. You know, we
right,
go drinking with each other. We spend time with each other's family because those are the people that I depend on to protect me each and every day. And
right,
you need those people each and every day also. There are some bad ones out there that cross over that line. But
mhm,
it takes people like you and take people like me in our culture to say, no, you're on the wrong side of that thin blue line. And
right.
we have to make sure we adjust that.
Yeah, so there's solace in shared experience, right?
Yes.
And that's what you're building. You're building a family of trust and loyalty because, as you said, officers are going into some of the worst situations, and it's only necessary for survival in a lot of respects that they really develop these relationships that are rooted in loyalty and trust, right?
Yes.
And so, one of the topics I want to talk about a little bit more in detail is the idea of the brotherhood, right? And we know what the brotherhood means, and it's about what we're talking about the culture of law enforcement that's rooted in that family unit, the trust, and the loyalty. But from an outside perspective, they see it as exclusionary and problematic. What would be your response to that?
I would say someone needs to possibly do a ride along with that officer so they can experience what that officer experienced every day. Uh, because I'm with that person, my partner. Uh, And we see things that no one else sees. We go on those same calls together. So sometimes we lean on each other for that. And just because, within that group, there are other groups. If I work in another zone, I may not be friends with that person in another zone, but I know when the bell sounds, so to speak, that I'm willing to go help that person.
Right.
Just like anything else, there's cultures within culture. I may not like you
Right.
as another officer, but when you're in trouble, I'm going to come run to you and I'm going to help you. So people should realize that it's just one of those things that you're trying, like you said, you're building that trust and you're building that loyalty that I know
Mhm.
that you're going to help me, you're going to protect me. That when I
Right.
go through that door, I'm not have to turn around and look to see who's in that door behind me. I know you're going to be there with me.
Right.
Or when I have that moment of weakness, that I can sit down and talk to you and say, "Hey, we were on that call. Let me talk to you about what happened. Maybe you saw
Mhm.
something I didn't see."
Yeah. And so, do you think that there is an ability to maintain loyalty, maintain trust, but still be able to focus on transparency, accountability, and reform to evolve this in a way that maybe the public views in a more positive way?
Yes, and I think it takes discussion like we're having here now and let people understand, let the officers understand that they have to do a job, but if they don't have that trust in the community, it's not going to work. We're going to make mistakes.
Mhm.
And if we try to cover it up or we try to lie about it, then, and I say this all the time, and we live that. When one officer makes a mistake or when one officer does something wrong, we all pay for it
Mhm.
because everybody then says it's the thin blue line. And sometimes you have to ask that person that's not a law enforcement officer, what are you talking about? If
Yeah.
I saw the officer do something wrong, I would report him or I would report
Mhm.
her.
Yeah.
But people just see it that way. I'm loyalty to a point, and loyalty means that I'm going to protect you and make sure you go home just like you're going to make sure I go home.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to be there with you when you violate the law. And
Right.
that's what when you do something wrong, I should be the person. If I go by my oath and the badge that I have on my chest, if I believe in that, then
Mhm.
if you're breaking the law, then you're no better than the next person across from me. Then you should be arrested.
So it sounds like what you're explaining to me with regard to the brotherhood and police culture and the blue line is it is already a system that's set up to create accountability and transparency within it because you are really building a strong cohesive unit in that there's safety and security in knowing if this officer is going to have my back in the worst of the worst, then there is a safety in me saying, hey, that wasn't okay. Would you agree that it's already built into the system that you have?
It is built into that system, but it has to also come from the top down and the bottom up.
Mm,
Everybody's got to believe in that if you do wrong, something's going to happen.
mhm,
And that person at the top, he or she's got to make sure it's understood that way. And that person at the bottom's got to understand that the person at the top is going to discipline. Because if you don't, then there is going to be a crack in that blue line because they're going
mhm,
to say, well, that chief or that sheriff has accepted that. So why am I going to speak about it? Because then
mhm,
I'm not going to be a part of the group or a part of
right,
that blue line. So I hate to say the best way of putting it, that blue line is a line in the sand where everyone has this, as you say, it's a delicate blue line, and you got to walk it. You can't straddle it.
right, yeah,
You're on it or you're off it.
mhm,
And if you're on it for the right reason, then you're there again to protect good and bad, evil,
mhm,
protect someone, to save someone. You're there. You took an oath, and you were saying that you were going to be there to protect someone. That means protect the person from that bad person, whether that person is wearing a badge or not. That's the
mhm.
job that you swore that you would do.
And you bring up, that officers are human and they make mistakes as well. And we've kind of discussed that the police culture allows for accountability within that. And then you also mentioned that the public comes down pretty hard, right? Doesn't allow the officers to make mistakes. But what I'm hearing is the brotherhood or police culture or the blue line, whatever you want to refer to it as, it does allow that. It does allow officers to be humans and to make mistakes, and that there are checks and balances in that system to hold those officers accountable to keep them on the right side of the line, right? So to
Sure.
speak. Maybe they're leaning, right? So you got to be on the line. You can't be on one side or the other because of the nature of law enforcement. But it keeps them in place.
And there's got to be somebody to help you keep you in place, whether that's your partner or whether that's the organization, because everybody's got to understand what it stands for. That you took an oath and you said this is what you're going to do and this is what you're willing to do with that. And sometimes that line gets a little blurry because, like you said, if I go back to that thing where someone just sexually assaulted a child, do I want to beat that person's head in? Yeah, I do, but I got to understand that that's
Mhm.
not my job. My job is
Yeah.
just to enforce the law. It's up to a jury to decide on what they're going to do from that point. And if I can't handle that, then I shouldn't be wearing this uniform. And that's where we law enforcement get confused. I'm not the judge and jury. I'm the one that's enforcing the law. I may not like that person selling drugs. I mean, all the things that person, it's not my job for that. My
Mhm.
job is I got called there, and my job is to enforce the law. And if I break the law, then I'm no better than that person that's breaking the law. So then, therefore, why am I saying there's a thin blue line? Because I crossed over that line.
Mhm.
So, one thing I wanted to say was that officers kind of live their life in this like fishbowl where every action they do is looked at by the media, judged by people, judged by citizens, judged even by politicians. And that can be something that can either bring them closer together with that group and share that blue line bond, or I feel like it's something that could really like drive them apart and make them want to turn to the more deviant side per se. And I feel like that's one of the things that I feel like the media should maybe stop focusing on as much is the fact that, officers should be allowed to make mistakes. And it seems like, as Lori was describing earlier, how, within that kind of bond within the group, it feels as though you're allowed to make a mistake because you know that, your partner will be there for you. You know that your colleagues will be there for you and they'll be there to support you, even when the media is attacking you.
And you're right. And what the also, I'll just speak for me. What we see is that we're willing to put our lives on the line,
Hmm.
but when we make a mistake, everyone kind of like throws us away.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
you know, and I always say, we say this when you dial 911, we're coming. We don't ask your race or any of that stuff.
Hmm.
Your religion, we say, you need us, we're coming.
Hmm.
And again, we're human. So are we going to make a mistake? We possibly could make a mistake.
Right.
Hopefully, we're not going to make a mistake over life and death. Okay.
Hmm.
We're going to put all those things that this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm trying to do. But at the same time, again, like I was saying earlier with Dr. Hall, is that then when we're doing this is to make sure that we don't violate someone's right,
Hmm.
that we stay together. And you're right, because everything we do is watch.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that because of the way things are. And again, what I said earlier, because one officer made a mistake, so we all do the same thing.
Right.
Well,
Right.
that's not true. You can't take a brush and paint all of us.
Yeah.
Right.
And and like I said, I'm the first one to say there are some cops out there that are doing the wrong thing, and let's find those officers and let's get them off the street. But at the same time, there are a lot of law enforcement officers that got into this profession because they wanted to protect someone. They
Yeah.
want to make sure that they're walking that blue line and protecting you from that evil.
Hmm.
What do you think, or what would your one thing, if you could change, that the media does with regard to law enforcement, what would that be?
Getting information out there too quickly. I'll say information.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, and I understand, media helps us when we need things too, but it's like I have a deadline and I got to get the story out there, and I'll clean it up later
Mm.
because people want to hear.
Mhm.
Well, let's slow down a little bit
Yeah.
because that first story you tell, the people may not hear the second and third or the final version.
Right.
They're going to take that message, the one that they want to hear,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and run with that message.
Yeah, it's a little too preemptive. They just get something out, and it might not even be the whole story. It might not be every angle of the story, and it is highly impactful, right? And it does long-term damage in some cases. Um, I agree. I think that that's probably a really good place to start is there's always such an urgency for, it to be the first or, the highlight or, whatever it may be. And I do value media, right? It's important that we communicate, but sometimes I think that it's a little too preemptive. Um, what is something that you would like to be able to communicate about police culture that maybe the general public isn't aware of?
I think people don't understand that we're human just like they are.
Mhm.
That, we have families, we have emotions, we feel the same thing they feel. We understand what they're going through. They probably don't think, but we are the ones that are being called there to make a decision. You called us because you got a problem, and you called us and you want us to fix that problem. It may not be the way you want us to fix it. It may not be the way you want us to solve it, but you called us. So we're coming there with the law, and we're going to try to follow that manual, and we're going to try to put a little bit of a human in there.
Right.
But then sometimes the law kind of like does what does you, it handcuffs us. So if the law says we got to do this, then that's what we have to do. Or the police policy may say this is what we have to do. So I think I blame us being law enforcement, that we don't do enough to explain to our community why we do what we do. Just like I said earlier about the media getting it out there too fast. Sometimes we don't get it out there when we know what's wrong,
Mm.
and we let the beast feed itself. If we know we've done something wrong, then we should go out there and admit, hey, we've done something wrong, and this is how we're going to fix it.
I think that's challenging though, because you already exist within, this world where you're in a fishbowl.
Mhm.
Everything is examined and highly critiqued. And it's also a cancel culture, right?
Right.
Where if you make a mistake, you're a RoboCop. Like you're just supposed to be perfect and do everything by the book, by the way it should be, the way we think you should do it. And all of your constraints, well, those are self-inflicted. And you just, if you make mistakes, well, then you shouldn't be doing this anymore. And I think that it's a difficult spot for law enforcement to be in because it's not a safe space for you to speak up and say, you know what, we made a mistake, or we shouldn't have acted in that way, or this violated the policy. It's not a safe space. And I think it's absolutely understandable that law enforcement are reluctant and hesitant to stand up and say, that we were wrong. And I think that it's extremely important if we want as members of the community, if we want to be able to co-create law enforcement and be an active participant in that, then we have to do work to create the space and the safety and the security for law enforcement to speak up and say, we didn't make the right decision here. We know what we need to do to fix it, and then allow that space for them to do that. And I think that we have those opportunities in all kinds of other fields, right?
Right.
But law enforcement is the one, well, no, you just have to be a RoboCop and you just have to be perfect. And when you make a mistake, well, you're done for.
And you're absolutely correct. But then at the same time, we have to use that, so to speak, space or downtime to explain that to people, that we are human, that these officers, I always say when you come to work, it's never the same thing. I hate when people say, well, it was a routine traffic stop. Show me one routine traffic stop and I'll give you $100.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing routine. There's that was the officer was on a routine call,
Yeah. They're all different. Yeah.
because all people are different.
Hmm. Yeah.
So and like the RoboCop, every call I go to, it's not the same person.
Yeah.
Unless I'm going to Miss Smith's house 20 times in one day, it's 20
And
different
even
content.
officers are different people on
Correct.
any given day throughout your shift. You're never the same person at the beginning as you are at the end, and that is human nature. That is just the way that we as humans exist. And I think the biggest issue that we have within society is recognizing that law enforcement are humans, period, beginning and end. They're humans, and they do human-centered work, right?
You're absolutely correct.
And so we also have to adopt this understanding that within groups of humans, cultures emerge, subcultures emerge, and these are beneficial for a lot of reasons, right? For the survival of whatever that group is facing, right? And law enforcement is no different. And we're asking law enforcement to go into, they're running into the worst of the worst as everyone else is running away, right? And it takes a certain kind of person to do that. And they need to have strong support systems to allow them to do those things. And I think law enforcement are put in such a difficult position because of the fishbowl, right? There's nothing that you can do that's right. Unless it benefits me.
Well,
Mhm.
and you're right, and what you're saying, like I said, and within that blue line culture, a lot of people, well, I can't tell them that I'm hurting. I can't tell them what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And if I go see someone, then I can't do my job anymore. They're going to take my
Mm.
livelihood away from me. Uh, so, so, so that's why it stays within that group. Maybe I can talk to my partner about it, but I can't tell anyone else about it.
Yeah.
So that's why you get closer and closer. So
Yeah.
when people say, that thin blue line, well, sometimes that's the only person I can talk to
Mhm.
because not every officer experiences the same thing, but they understand a lot of things that you're going through. They notice like when you hear a certain call and your heart is beating through your chest and am I going to go home tonight? Or when I'm walking up on that car, who's in that car? Or what am I getting myself into? So your heartbeat goes up and down, whether you want to admit it or not. Some of the super couples, no, they're not. Uh,
They're humans.
so
Mhm.
Yeah.
that blue line is like I said, it's thin, but you just got to walk on it. You got to understand what it means. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean to hide behind or lie. It means that you're there to protect the other side.
Yeah, you have support, right? You have a system in place that law enforcement have created a system that supports and protects because to be quite honest, society has abandoned law enforcement in a lot of regards. You don't really see, individuals stepping up and backing law enforcement in a real tangible way other than to say, thank you for your service, or here's a 10% discount, or I've got the bumper sticker on, right? That is in so long as you do as we say. The second that law enforcement do things that the public don't like, then the hammer comes down and the abandonment begins, right? And it's a difficult place to be,
And you're absolutely correct. Or it's not the end thing to do.
right?
And you're right. You'll get those phone calls. Thank you for your service. I appreciate you. But when I'm in a group of, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I can't speak in your behalf because I don't want that culture to see me on your side.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
But when you're in trouble, I'm the first one you call.
Absolutely.
It's very true. I think that that's one of the things that a lot of people don't necessarily think about until they're in that situation where they're in trouble and they have to call police or law enforcement and they're just like, "Oh, well, it's like they're kind of like they're on both sides of the coin where they're like, "Oh, well, law enforcement is bad, I don't support them, whatever, and like, I don't approve." And but then as soon as they're in trouble, who are they calling? I mean, they're calling
I
law
think that's a,
enforcement.
a phenomenal point because I think so often you hear people say, oh, I hate cops,
Mhm.
but yet that's the first person they call when they're in trouble, right? And it's such a conundrum, right? Like it's like you claim to dislike these individuals for whatever reason, like they've never met, right?
Right.
Right.
Um, but yet that's the person that you call when you're at your worst.
Mhm. Well, it's like
you know,
that's the person you're expecting to save you, yet you say you hate them.
which is an odd thing if you think about in the context of this conversation on police culture, right? You're not expecting officers to save you that, necessarily hate each other, right?
Correct.
You
Mhm.
mentioned they might not, talk to them a whole lot, but in general, like these individuals they have your back. You have a system, you have a culture that's created where, they're going to be there. You're not calling the people that hate you to come and save you.
Not at all. And like I said, that culture, I know when I have this badge on, I have this uniform on. If I know I'm screaming on the radio or I need help, I know everyone that has a badge and a gun, they're coming to me. They're coming to help me. Good, bad, and different. Race doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. Sexual orientation doesn't matter. They're coming to protect me because they know I'm
Even
doing.
the culture has been constructed in such a way that it doesn't even necessarily have to be St. Pete Police.
You're 100% correct.
It's
Mhm.
if you're out and you are in need and there is someone else, maybe they're off duty, but they're law enforcement, they're most likely going to come to your aid.
And it's funny you say it because I'll catch myself doing it if I'm off duty and if I see an officer, if he or she's by themselves and they're talking to someone, I'll stand there and I'll watch just to make sure they're okay,
Mhm.
Yeah.
or until I see their backup get there. Name what other culture would do that. Just stand there just to make sure.
And I think that that highlights the importance and the necessity of having this type of loyalty and solidarity and really this brotherhood that's been constructed. One, it's out of survival, right?
Correct.
But it's also because you're existing in a world that generally is very, very critical of law enforcement. And there's not a whole lot of real tangible support that you get outside of these individuals. You mention a lot of times about, like if we're this collective experience, we are experiencing things, this shared experience that we have, we can talk to each other, right? You don't experience that out in the world, and you have been so impacted by seeing the worst of the worst and living on the blue line, so much so that it permeates your personal lives in a way that it's hard to develop those kinds of um, brotherhoods, so to speak, with individuals who have no idea of what that's like, right?
Correct.
And so it's really, uh, in my opinion, a quite beautiful system that creates this protective mechanism existing in the fishbowl,
Mhm.
right? And it's necessary. But I think that the biggest issue is that we don't have a lot of these conversations about what the blue line is and the thin blue line and what the brotherhood looks like and what it means to law enforcement. I think that we sit around a lot and we have conversations about law enforcement without including law enforcement. And we make up our own stories about what this or that is without getting the firsthand account and the actual experience from law enforcement. And so I think that it's really beneficial to have these types of conversations about these topics.
And I 100% agree with you because if you were to ask a bunch of officers what does the thin blue line mean, and they would probably say, right, to protect each other. And if you ask another group, to cover up each other. And
Mm,
it's totally night and day. I mean,
mhm.
the thin blue line means exactly what I'm there to protect you. And if you ask me the next question, I'm there to protect you from the bad part of it. But
Yeah.
then the other people just look at it as the thin blue line is they're going to cover for each other.
Mhm.
I am going to cover that person's back when they're going through that door. I'm
Mm,
not going to cover for when they do something wrong. And I think, like you said, we don't have enough of those conversations to ask that
right.
officer, what does that really mean?
Yeah. Well, thank y'all for coming out. This is The Beat, the podcast where we talk about building equity, accountability, and trust with law enforcement.